low 20s. Now, as we go into this evening, that rain will continue to spread northeastwards, starting to clear up towards northern Scotland. So some drier weather across much of England and Wales through the start of Saturday, though we will start to see showers popping up for western areas. Remaining windy as well, and with all of that wind and some cloud around, despite some clearer spells, temperatures still generally remaining in the double figures through tonight. So to start Saturday, a drier start for some compared to today, with that rain now across northern Scotland. But heavy showers and some thunderstorms will develop throughout tomorrow morning, and strong winds continuing too. But this time the strongest gusts will be across central, southern and eastern parts of England, with temperatures still remaining below average for the time of year.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Read my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Friday the 14th of July and this is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and today, Emily Carver.
Public sector staff are set to get a pay rise of 5 to 7%. But is it all it seems? We'll hear from the government, as well as a teacher and a junior doctor.
And we'll quiz the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, in just a moment on that public sector pay.
And we're expecting a decision on whether the challenge against RAF Scampton housing asylum seekers will go ahead to a full hearing. We'll find out at 11 a.m.
And could space engineering be a booming career path in Britain? We'll find out why the space industry is ready for blast-off with a Danish spaceman, her winner.
And I've got a big question for you at home. Should we ban mobile phones in pubs? Tom, for goodness sake, we're on air.
I'm terrible at it. I'm always doing it.
One pub in Cheshire, where Harry Styles grew up, actually, in a village there, is banning phones. They think it makes for a better pub, presumably. So...
Well, I'm always on my mobile phone. I'm terrible at it. Might a ban help me out? I don't like banning things. So I'm not in favour. I don't know. gbviews@gbnews.com is where you need to email, should pubs ban phones? We'll be getting to that and all the other stories through the programme today. But first, it's your morning headlines with Rhiannon James.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning. It's 9:31. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Junior doctors in England have said they're in it for the long run on day 2 of their 5-day strike. That's despite the government's offer of a 6% pay rise, which the Prime Minister says is final. The British Medical Association says more strikes are possible. They want an offer closer to the 12.4% given to junior doctors in Scotland. People have been forced to pull out their own teeth because they can't access or afford NHS care. A new report by the Health and Social Care Committee found 10% of people admitted to attempting DIY dentistry. It says the evidence of pain and distress is totally unacceptable in the 21st century. It's calling for urgent and fundamental reform. The NHS says it's already started making changes, including to contracts with dentists. A breakthrough may have been made in a bid to unlock Boris Johnson's old mobile phone after an ally suggested the government had recovered a PIN code. The deadline to hand over unredacted messages to the COVID inquiry was missed this week due to complications accessing the former Prime Minister's phone. The device likely contains content relating to the ordering of lockdowns, as well as details on the early response to the coronavirus pandemic. The government has already handed over the rest of Mr. Johnson's documents following a High Court order, having initially argued it was irrelevant. And almost 1,000 workers at Gatwick Airport, including baggage handlers and check-in staff, will stage 8 days of strikes later this month. Unite Union says they're because of ongoing pay disputes. Workers will walk out for 4 days from Friday the 28th, then again from Friday the 4th of August for another 4 days. Airlines affected include British Airways, EasyJet, Ryanair, TUI, WestJet and Wizz Air. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now it's back over to Tom and Emily.
Well, a very good morning to you. This is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and today, Emily Carver. Welcome to the show, Emily.
I'm very happy to be here with you, Tom.
It's going to be a great show.
I don't believe we've ever hosted together.
We have never. This is the first time on GB News, and we've got so much to talk about today. Some really big stories, but also a question.
We've got a question for you at home. Should we ban mobile phones in pubs? I'm asking because there's one pub where Harry Styles grew up in Cheshire that's been called the strictest pub in England. Now, they're banning mobile phones along with other things, but mobile phones is what I'm thinking about because Tom, my friend here, I mean, his phone is an extension of his hand.
Oh, absolutely. It's, you know how Elon Musk called us all part cyborg because we use so much technology so much of the time. I think perhaps I am part cyborg, the amount I'm on my mobile telephone. Is it good for us, though? I mean, we've got so much knowledge at the end of our fingertips. There's a positive case to be made for mobile phones.
No one likes to be fact-checked. Do you know what's really annoying is when you're having a conversation with someone in a pub, perhaps, and you say something And then they check you. They check. Google. Is that true, actually, Tom, that, I don't know what it is, that Rishi Sunak has offered pay rises of around 6% to doctors, and then he can just check, you know?
We can
catch
check.
you out.
But do you know what we could also do? We could hear from the horse's mouth. We could hear from a government minister on the very details of what's going on. And I'm delighted to say that we can be joined in just a moment by the Secretary of State for Education, Gillian Keegan. Gillian, thank you so much for joining us here on GB News. Now, around 6% is being offered to public sector workers, doctors, and of course teachers, your area. But I do wonder, how is this all going to be paid for?
Well, that is actually the big question, of course, because the headline figures are what the independent pay review bodies have recommended, and there's a range of different things they've recommended because they look at each specific situation in great detail. You know, they look at recruitment, retention, they look at pay, they look at the whole package, they look at, you know, equivalent positions, etc. So that it does differ a bit. For teachers, it's 6.5%. In the school budgets that we have with the extra 2 billion that we got recently, they have budgeted 3.5%. So when it came back at 6.5%, that leaves me with a 3% delta difference, which we have had to try and find funding for that, because it's very clear that for teachers particularly, and for head teachers, it's really important that it's funded, because they don't want to have to make, you know, cuts to teaching assistants or school trips or other resources within schools to pay for one pay rise. So we have had to fund that, and that's something that has taken a bit of time. It's been quite difficult, but it's been helped very much by the Treasury. So the Treasury, what they usually do with departments is any spend that you don't make, so if your forecast is too high or you don't deliver as quickly as you thought, and all of those underspends, they always go back to the Treasury and then they reprioritise on behalf of the government. But in this case, they've permitted us to keep those underspends. So what I've been doing is going through line by line every bit of the budget, looking at the forecast, looking at the programmes that we we haven't started yet, we could slow down, and that's how we've done it. And
so could you give us an example of one of those areas of underspend where the area will be getting less money than had originally been announced? Does this include, for example, some of that catch-up funding?
No, so not that had been announced. Now, catch-up funding is a good example, because in the National Tutoring Fund, it's a demand-led fund, so it's basically called on by all of the schools, and we obviously anticipate how much they would need, and they call it off. If there's anything left there that isn't used, and there was last year and we anticipate there will be this year, then that will move over. But it's nobody has been told that they can't have the funding that they need. So we have, and in fact we've already increased that quite a lot. But there's things like, for example, if we had a new building project, or we were looking at rolling out some additional schools or additional things. If we haven't started those yet, we'll look at whether we actually think we can deliver it. People tend to be quite optimistic with forecasts. Obviously, we've got shortages of construction workers. Sometimes planning takes longer. So we've really gone through line by line. Demand-led things, for example. So there may be a qualification, a new qualification. We're anticipating there'll be so many people who want to study it. Maybe less people come forward. So we've really gone through in painstaking detail to try and make sure we protect the frontline budgets without and making sure we can afford the pay.
Gillian, you talk about shortages in the economy in terms of the labour market. You said construction workers, but we've also got a shortage with teachers, and this is something that parents are very concerned about, and teachers themselves, of course, are very concerned about. 40,000 teachers resigned from state schools last year, a further 4,000 retired. That's a lot of the workforce leaving. Is 6.5% pay increase, is that enough to keep teachers interested in this profession? I feel like there's something more going on here. Why are so many teachers leaving?
Well, first of all, there are always a percentage of teachers that leave. A lot of them go off and retire, some of them go off into other professions. It's actually been quite stable over the years, so it might sound like a lot, but if you look at, we've got over 500,000 teachers, way over 500,000 teachers, so if you look at it in terms of percentage terms, it's actually been quite stable. However, obviously what we want to do is make sure that we retain every teacher that wants to stay, and also we recruit more teachers. One of the things that we're bringing forward, which was a manifesto commitment, is increasing the starting salaries for graduate teachers to £30,000 outside of London from September this year. So that's something we committed in the manifesto. I think it's a competitive graduate salary, and that's something that we'll be introducing from September. We do have a lot of applicants for teaching as well, but what we've always struggled with is certain subjects. So we are also introducing bursaries, additional tax-free payments for certain subjects in certain areas. So maths is one, physics, computer science is often one, where you're competing with businesses for the same skills. So we do have additional bursaries, scholarships and payments for certain specific subjects. And what I've also asked them to look at is a degree apprenticeship for teaching for those subjects, because I think that's also would broaden the pipeline of people who can access teaching as a profession.
Now, yesterday when the Prime Minister was announcing the pay rises, not just in education, but of course across the board, in the NHS as well, particularly, we were told that there would be new charges on migrants, both on visas and on the health surcharge, and this would help part fund some of those pay rises. But I'm finding it very, very difficult to find any numbers attached to that. How much does the government expect these extra charges on migrants will actually raise?
I think it's about £1 billion. I think that the numbers are around about £1 billion. I think the total we have to find across all the departments, around about £5 billion. In the case of education, over the 2 years, it's just under £2 billion, because as well as the teachers, we've also introduced a fund for maybe smaller schools, because obviously I look at everything on averages, but there could be some schools where they are struggling because of falling roles or specific circumstances. So I've increased the sort of fund to support those schools, so if they are in financial difficulty, so that's another £40 million. And then for the first time, actually, we've also put more money for retention and recruitment into the FE sector. So that's 185 million in the first year, 285 million in the second year. So that's my bit of it. I think in total it's about 5 billion, and I think the additional surcharges, I think, are about £1 billion of that.
I think it's good to hear that, this isn't going to be paid for by massive tax increases on us, but it does seem to be slightly worrying that we might be seeing cuts in departmental spending when schools are already complaining of shortages and difficulties. But let's move on to one of the things that you wanted to talk to us today about. So students looking to work in the UK's growing space sector have something to look forward to, is that right?
That's right. So what we're launching is a space systems engineer degree apprenticeship. I don't know if you know, but I'm a huge fan of degree apprenticeships. I did one myself. I'm the only degree apprentice in the House of Commons. And one of the things I brought to the role as Apprenticeships and Skills Minister and now as Secretary of State for Education is a huge focus on higher level and degree apprenticeships, because they are a brilliant way for any young person or for any older person that wants to access a career to be able to get a job, earn, learn, get their degree paid for or their higher technical qualification paid for as well, and really get on in the workplace. They're brilliant for social mobility, they're brilliant for access, they're brilliant for older people that want to, for example, go into teaching. But today's is the Space Systems Engineer degree apprenticeship, and I just know I met quite a few degree apprentices yesterday. It will start in September 2024, so there's a number of businesses that will offer this. I just think it's really exciting. Space is something we're really good at, and it's really exciting to be able to offer those easy, accessible and supported routes into a fantastic industry for the next generation.
That does sound really exciting, although I can't help notice that we did fail to launch the first domestic space launch only a few months ago. Perhaps with some of these apprenticeships and people going through these degree apprenticeships, perhaps we'll actually get something off the ground from this country finally.
Don't be defeated.
I am pretty sure they will. I am pretty sure they will. I mean, obviously, when you're doing something ambitious like space, you can't expect it to work first time all the time. But I am 100% sure that there are so so many young people that have got so much to offer to this industry, and they've got now great roots into it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they can produce. Space fascinates us all, so I'm looking forward to seeing the UK's position in space be strengthened.
Well, Gillian Keegan, Education Secretary, thank you so much for joining us here on Britain's Newsroom this morning. Really interesting stuff there, and actually lots of people have been getting in touch about some of these issues about the pay rise as well. Malcolm has written in about doctors, saying, in my day, doctors regarded the job as a calling for their love of mankind. Now they appear to be young people trying to make as much money as possible with no regard for people. Well, I suppose that is a point in terms of should your calling not be about people. But then again, if you look at other countries where doctors are paid considerably more, maybe because they have different sorts of health systems, it is hard to think that actually why should we pay our doctors so much less?
I mean, no, Tom, I remember, you must remember as well when you were at university and you had friends who were doing doctor's degrees. Not all of them had it potentially as a vocation. More people do see it as a money maker, and perhaps it's not making as much money as their mates in the city now.
No,
that's an issue.
That is an issue.
But what did you make of what Gillian had to say there? It seems like she was very articulate. She seemed to put the case, oh no, we're not going to have any major cuts, but I'm not sure I buy that.
But I think it was nice that she was honest about this delineation. We see on the front page of some newspapers this morning, fees paid by migrants will fund pay rises. But we just heard from the Education Secretary that no, they won't. They'll pay for £1 billion, and £5 billion needs to be found elsewhere. So that's 1/6 being paid for by the thing the government said it would pay it for. But as we heard from Gillian Keegan, there's a lot more money that needs to be found elsewhere. I thought that was really interesting.
And at the same time, our debt is 100% of GDP currently, isn't it, Tom? So we'll be discussing that with an economist later on in the show.
But talking of problems for the government, the Prime Minister faces potentially losing 3 previously safe Tory seats next week with a string of tense by-elections.
Yes, losses in the constituencies would exacerbate concerns over Sunak's leadership ahead of the general election.
Yes, well, let's have a look at what is actually going on with Professor Matt Goodwin, Professor in Politics and International Relations, of course. Matt, thanks so much for joining us this morning. This is almost spectacular expectations management from the Conservative Party. Seats that have majorities in 2 cases of above 20,000 votes, and everyone expects they'll lose them. Is that what you think?
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely spot on, Tom. The game with by-elections is always expectation management. And with these particular contests, I think we're looking at a summer of discontent for Rishi Sunak. Let's just step back from those by-elections a minute, look at the national polling story. I'm afraid to say for number 10, the trend is now turning against them after a bit of a bounce earlier this year for Rishi Sunak. Now Labour's lead is extending again up to around 20 points. So if viewers want a metric to keep in mind, to win a majority at the next general election, Labour will need to be about 12.5 points ahead in the national polls. They're currently averaging about 18, 19 points ahead of the Conservatives. So these by-elections are likely to see some enormous swings away from the Conservatives. One question, Tom, to keep in mind, though, is earlier by-elections this year, Labour actually underperformed the national polls. They still did very well, but they underperformed the national polls. If actually they now perform in line with these national polls, then this should really be flashing the red warning sign in number 10. So I'm going to be watching how is Labour doing relative to that national story.
When we look at the polling in detail, it does show that at least when it comes to who makes the best Prime Minister, it does seem that Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are, well, they're equal, are they not? Is there any hope that Rishi Sunak could turn it around? What could he do, in your view, that might bring back the general British public to his side?
Yeah, I mean, they are certainly broadly similar, Emily, but they're also both quite unpopular figures. I mean, we have a somewhat unique position at the moment in British politics, and that everybody is basically unpopular. Millions of people out there watching this show will be feeling utterly fed up and disillusioned with British politics. And I think essentially what Sunak's got a number of problems, one of which is he's a little bit more popular than a very unpopular party. The Conservative brand is basically toxic. I was sat in focus groups in the Red Wall just 2 weeks ago. The Conservative Party has an enormous image problem, which I don't really need to explain beyond that. I think, secondly, Sunak doesn't really have a lead on any of the major issues facing voters today, on the economy, on National Health Service, on immigration. On all of these big seismic issues, Labour is either ahead by a few points or is comfortably ahead, as with the NHS, by 20, 25 points. Now, when you don't have ownership over any of these big issues in British politics, you're not going to win the next election, right? You're just simply not going to win the next election. I think back previously, Boris Johnson, he was leagues ahead on Brexit. That was his path to a majority. Tony Blair, leagues ahead on education and public services. That was his path to victory. Margaret Thatcher, leagues ahead on inflation and industrial disputes. That was her path to victory. Sunak today doesn't have any big leads on that issue, on these issues. So that's another massive problem. And just lastly, Emily, look at history. No party in the entire history of British politics has emerged as the largest political party at 5 elections in a row. So already history is working against the Conservatives, irrespective of all of those problems I mentioned, irrespective of inflation, irrespective of record legal and illegal migration, irrespective of the fact that he's only holding half of Boris Johnson's 2019 voters, and irrespective of the fact that the Conservatives no longer really know who they are or what they believe. So look, I'm going to give Rishi Sunak a 5% chance of winning the next general election, but Labour are odds on for a reason. These fundamentals do not favour the Conservatives.
No, it'll be absolutely fascinating to see how these by-elections play out this time next week. Well, no doubt we'll be dissecting whatever's happened on this very programme. But for now, Professor Matthew Goodwin, thank you so much for joining us here on Britain's Newsroom.
It's interesting, though, there doesn't seem to be too much enthusiasm for the Labour Party, does there? I don't think anyone's going to be, skipping into the into the polling station, are
Keir
they?
Starmer's the luckiest man in history with his opponents. Anyway, our Don't Kill Cash campaign now has over 214,000 signatures.
Yes, with more than 5 million people in the UK relying on cash every single day, new banking hubs in Britain have shown that hard money is still crucial in this society.
So let's talk about the importance of cash now for one particular area, the British Legion. Billy Wilde is an organiser for the annual Poppy Appeal. And Billy, thank you for joining us this morning. I suppose physical cash, coins in pots, really matters for buying poppies.
Absolutely. So the Royal British Legion last year raised the headline figure of £47.7 million, which is amazing. And yet about 40% of that is actually cash. So to the Royal British Legion, over £20 million worth of the vital funds that they raise every year is cash in the pot. And it's really, really important to the charities not to lose out on such a huge proportion of the funding they have. With the knock-on effect being the lack of services we can offer to the veterans, the serving personnel and the families that we vitally support.
I've seen the Poppy Appeal out and about, and quite a lot of them have these little card machines that you can do a bit of a tap on to give £5, £2, £10, whatever it is. How widespread is that? Is that just a city thing, or is that across the nation?
No, that's growing across the nation. So the British Legion has been using it for about five or so years, I think. They're the largest charity that use it in a street appeal every year, and it's growing. Don't get me wrong, but the cash is, as I said, is still making up over 40% of the donations. We've got contactless, you've got QR codes, bank transfers, large corporation donations that make up the other 60%. So cash is still vital for the Royal British Legion to make a massive impact on the lives of those that need us.
Yeah, I think that's the important point about this campaign. It's not about ending the use of electronic money, which I think a lot of us find really useful.
Yes, we're not Luddites.
It's about keeping plurality of choice.
Yeah.
And if you believe in choice and about keeping cash, there's a QR code on the screen right now. Go onto the camera app on your phone, scan that magic code and it'll take you to gbnews.com/cash. Or, of course, if you don't want to scan your television screen with your mobile phone, the website address is there too, gbnews.com/cash. But Billy Wilde of the Royal British Legion, thank you so much for your work, firstly, in raising all that money and indeed for supporting this campaign as well. I appreciate your time this morning.
Wonderful.
Well, yeah,
well,
no, absolutely.
Do you know what? It is true. It's all about choice.
Yeah.
Having the choice. And I do actually miss a bit of hard cash. I never have any on me.
Oh, you do it for haircuts. That's the only thing.
Haircuts? I do it for nails.
Very good. Well, still to come is more reaction on all this public sector pay issue, but also that crucial question. Should we ban mobile phones in pubs? A lot of you have been writing in. We'll hear your views.
I think so. He thinks not.
You're watching Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it's quite a wet, gloomy and miserable start outside there today for many, with this band of heavy rain making its way northeastwards throughout this morning. Some strong winds too, with coastal gales around the southwest and parts of Wales through this morning, so do take care if you are out and about. It will remain driest for longest across parts of Scotland and northeast England, but the rain will reach there eventually. And with all that cloud and those strong winds around, temperatures will be below average for the time of year through today, with highs only reaching into the low 20s. Now, as we go into this evening, that rain will continue to spread northeastwards, starting to clear up towards northern Scotland. So some drier weather across much of England and Wales through the start of Saturday, though we will start to see showers popping up for western areas. Remaining windy as well, and with all of that wind and some cloud around, despite some clearer spells, temperatures still generally remaining in the double figures through tonight. So to start Saturday, a drier start for some compared to today, with that rain now across northern Scotland. But heavy showers and some thunderstorms will develop throughout tomorrow morning, and strong winds continuing too. But this time the strongest gusts will be across central, southern and eastern parts of England, with temperatures still remaining below average for the time of year.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. on Friday the 14th of July, and this is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and today, the wonderful Emily Carver.
Rishi Sunak has offered pay rises of around 6% to millions of public sector workers, including doctors and teachers. That's in a bid to end the devastating strikes. But how is he going to pay for it? We'll try and work out.
And we're seeing the sharpest spike in people defaulting on their mortgages since 2009. With millions expected to be paying hundreds of pounds more, we ask, how close is this market to collapse?
Goodness. And as the government says it will concede no more compromises on the illegal migration bill, we ask, can this bill become law by the time MPs break up for summer recess next week? Time is running out.
Seeing on the screen there. Of course, on the screen there, we were looking at Archbishop Welby, who's been one of the critics of the bill in the House of Lords. But the big question we want to ask you isn't about that. Today, it's about something else.
It is. There is a pub in Cheshire, in a Cheshire village where Harry Styles, no less, grew up.
Very important village.
And they ban mobile phones in their pub. They're called the strictest pub in Britain. So, should we ban mobile phones in pubs? I think so.
I think less. I think phones are great. But what do you think? GBviews at gbnews.com. We'll be discussing that a little bit later. But first, here's your morning news with Rhiannon James.
Good morning, it's 2 minutes past 10. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Junior doctors in England have said they're in it for the long run on day 2 of their 5-day strike. That's despite the government's offer of a 6% pay rise, which the Prime Minister says is final. The British Medical Association says more strikes are possible. They want an offer closer to the 12.4% given to junior doctors in Scotland. Meanwhile, all 4 teaching unions have called for their strikes to be cancelled, saying members should accept the 6.5% pay rise they've been offered. The Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, told GB News exactly how it's been funded. People have almost 1,000 workers at Gatwick Airport, including baggage handlers and check-in staff, will stage 8 days of strikes later this month. Unite Union says they're because of ongoing pay disputes. Workers will walk out for 4 days from Friday the 28th, then again from Friday the 4th of August for another 4 days. Airlines affected include British Airways, EasyJet, Ryanair, TUI, WestJet and Wizz Air. People have been forced to pull out their own teeth because they can't access or afford NHS care. A new report by the Health and Social Care Committee found 10% of people admitted to attempting DIY dentistry. It says the evidence of pain and distress is totally unacceptable in the 21st century. It's calling for urgent and fundamental reform. The NHS says it's already started making changes, including to contracts with dentists. Experts have said it's still safe to consume aspartame in limited quantities, despite it being declared a possible cause of cancer. The sweetener's used in everything from fizzy drinks to cough sweets and even toothpaste. But the World Health Organization says the average person would need to drink 14 cans of a diet soft drink a day to exceed the safe levels. A breakthrough may have been made in a bid to unlock Boris Johnson's old mobile phone after an ally suggested the government had recovered a PIN code. The deadline to hand over unredacted messages to the COVID inquiry was missed this week due to complications accessing the former Prime Minister's phone. The device likely contains content relating to the ordering of lockdowns, as well as details on the early response to the coronavirus pandemic. The government's already handed over the rest of Mr Johnson's documents following a High Court order, having initially argued it was irrelevant. King Charles and Queen Camilla's coronation outfits are going on display for the very first time. Items from the King's coronation will open to the public at Buckingham Palace from today. Items on display include the gold St Edward's crown that was used in the ceremony and the diamond Jubilee state coach that brought King Charles to the Abbey. More than 250,000 people are expected to visit the palace over the summer. A coroner has ruled that Lisa Marie Presley died from an obstruction in her small bowel caused by scar tissue from weight loss surgery. The singer-songwriter and Elvis Presley's only child died in January, 2 days after attending the Golden Globes. She had bariatric surgery several years ago. The development of adhesions are a known long-term risk of the procedure. And Hollywood actors have joined a strike by screenwriters for the first time in 60 years after their unions voted to walk out following the breakdown of talks with studios. Stars at the London premiere of Oppenheimer left early after the result of the vote by the Screen Actors Guild was announced. As well as a pay rise, actors want guarantees AI versions of their likeness won't be used to replace them without permission or payment. And engineers at the European Space Agency will attempt to guide a defunct satellite back to Earth in the first mission of its kind. The Aeolus satellite has been orbiting for almost 5 years, sending back data which has helped improve weather forecasting. But having run out of fuel, it's expected to fall back to Earth within the next few weeks. Most of it's expected to burn up on re-entry, but scientists are aiming to use the last of its fuel to make sure anything that doesn't falls into the ocean. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back over to Tom and Emily.
A very good morning to you. This is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Emily Carver. And I have to say, a lot of you have been getting in touch about the things we've been talking about today.
Yes, well, banning phones in pubs. John Tandy has a very strong view. He says, for a democracy, we do seem very keen to ban all kinds of things. Mobile phones in pubs, the latest ban, good Lord, no.
Well, John...
That sounds like Tom Harwood.
John, I have to say I agree with you. I think this society bans far too many things. We should surely have sort of social expectations rather than strict rules. But some people disagree. Alan has written in to say mobile phones should be banned in pubs as they kill the art of conversation. Alan says his local has banned them and they all just talk to each other. I mean,
yes.
that is a...
Apparently this is actually more common than we think, because Linda's also said a pub near her has banned phones for quite some time. They don't have TV screens either. It's quite funny watching people use their phones surreptitiously. That's what Tom would be doing. He'd be like this, you know.
Although Steve has written in with a really good point, actually, and it ties into something else we'll be talking about this morning, which is our Don't Kill Cash campaign. He's said, not a bad idea to ban phones in pubs. However, have they thought this through? If the campaign to retain cash doesn't go through, how are people going to pay for their drinks? I pay with my phone, I pay with my watch. I can't remember the last time I actually used a physical credit card.
That is a very good point, and half the time ATMs don't have any money in them, so then you have to jump that hurdle.
Well, keep your views coming in on this subject. It's certainly lit up the inbox this morning, but of course there are other big things to talk about as well.
Yes, there are. Rishi Sunak has offered pay rises of around 6% to millions of public sector workers. That includes doctors, teachers. We spoke to Gillian Keegan earlier, who talked us through the figures. And that's all in a bid to end the devastating strikes.
Well, speaking of teachers, all 4 of those teaching unions have now said that they'll urge their members to accept the Prime Minister's new offer, which would end, of course, lots and lots of strikes. But, of course, the BMA, the Doctors' Union, has said that they wouldn't accept this pay offer. So the teachers agree, the doctors perhaps not.
But do we actually know if the teachers are going to agree? The unions have said that they should vote for this, but we haven't actually heard from the teachers yet.
And if there's one thing that history should teach us, it's that union members don't always agree with union leaders.
Exactly.
But let's get a lot more on this now. Let's cross to Westminster, where GB News political reporter Olivia Utley is there for us outside Parliament. Olivia, how has this landed across these different sectors?
Well, on the whole, it feels as though we're in a much better situation across most sectors than we've been in a really long time now. The fact that the teaching unions, 4 of the teaching unions, have called off their strikes while they wait to find out what their members say, and they are encouraging their members to accept, though, of course, as you mentioned there, sometimes union workers don't actually agree with their union leaders, and we saw that in the health sector earlier this year. The junior doctor strike, as you say, is still going on. It is the biggest walkout in NHS history, the longest walkout in NHS history, so there's still a massive problem for the government there. On the whole, though, it feels we're in a very unusual situation where it almost feels as though both sides think that they've won. You've got Gillian Keegan doing a sort of victory lap of the media studios, if you like, this morning. She feels as though only getting to 6.5% wasn't so bad. She's pleased that she's won her own personal fight with the Treasury too. And of course, the teaching unions have already said that they would have accepted a 6.5% pay rise. That said, there are still some very big questions about where the funding is coming from. We've heard a lot from Rishi Sunak over the last couple of days of where the funding won't be coming from. He says that he won't be raising taxes, he won't be borrowing, he won't be taking the money from the core schools budget or from the core NHS budget. So where exactly is the money going to come from? Well, in the health sector, it sounds as though what he's going to do is raise the amount of money it costs for a foreigner to come here temporarily. They already have to pay a bill to access the NHS when they're here, and that bill is going to go up by £400. That helps a little bit, that raises about £1 billion, but there is still £1 billion to be found in the health sector alone this year, and another £2 billion next year. Meanwhile, in the education sector, there's talk that it's going to come from underspends, i.e. programmes which haven't actually spent their full budget after school tuition, for example. But again, it feels as though that's a pretty small pot to fill a pretty large black hole. And at the moment, the funding issue is really shrouded in mystery.
Well, Olivia Utley, thank you for shedding some light there on the mysteries that still remain. Known unknowns come to mind. Unknown unknowns and all the rest of it. Donald Rumsfeld.
We know we're not having tax increases. We know we're not going to have more borrowing. Unless you're a migrant, then you're going to have to pay a little bit more, apparently. Yeah. And we've got no economic growth to pay for it. No. So clearly, there's going to have to be a squeeze on services.
Well, let's get some more analysis about this, particularly on this issue of economic growth, I feel. Let's speak to the Director of Research at the Adam Smith Institute think tank, Maxwell Marlowe, who joins us here in the studio. Maxwell, thank you for joining us this morning. This is the fundamental point, isn't it? These conversations are so much harder when we're not seeing much growth in the economy.
You're absolutely right, Tom. You're absolutely right. The thing is, we can only get tax revenue from 3 sources. That's direct taxation, which, as you've just said, Emily, isn't going to rise, according to the Chancellor. You can borrow it, but our borrowing is now 100% of GDP, and given the interest rate rises, we're already spending about 3.5% of GDP on paying the interest on those loans. Gosh. And finally, it's from productivity rises, which, since the financial crash, we have been some of the lowest in the G7 to raise productivity, to grow the pie and get more tax out of it. It's not going to happen. So how are these these pay rises going to be paid for? It's pulling money out of existing services, and what I think is going to happen is going to be pulled out of capital investment. Now, we already have very low capital investment in the public services and even in the private sector.
What do you mean by that, capital investment?
It's investment in infrastructure, in IT systems, in, the things we use to create the services.
We spoke to Gillian Keegan about half an hour ago, and she was saying there are some projects, school building projects, that now might not go ahead because of planning complications or whatever. It sounds like physically building things and indeed, as you say, investing in that sort of in that physical capital is going to be less. You seem to have hit the nail on the head there. What does that mean, therefore, for our public services going into the future?
That means in 5 years' time, probably when Labour's in power, but, you know, bets are off at the moment, it means that those schools are not going to be built. It means that the current stock of schools or hospitals or police stations or really anything used as a public service to house the public service is going to be deteriorating more. It means cost for renovation is going to go up, and it means that the tax bill in the future is going to be much higher.
It's also miserable, really, isn't it? It seems that we are discovering that there are trade-offs when it comes to our public services and when it comes to government spending and when it comes to taxes and, well, the economy. Essentially, that is what we're learning. And I can just see in a few months' time, or not even in a few months' time, in weeks' time, yes, even if the teachers accept this 6.5%, for example, 1 month down the road, they'll be complaining that there's not the money going into the buildings, as you say, or into the IT systems. It's just a difficult one for the government.
Is this short-termism? Is this much as the same as we've been seeing with HS2, where they say, you know what, we're going to build this more slowly, so each year it costs less, but actually it costs more over the course of, I don't know, however many years it is, 15, 20 years. This seems like politicians caring more about 12 months ahead than potentially a decade ahead.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, let's look at, for example, policing, which I know you cover a lot on GB News. The Police National Computer is the same computer they've been using since 1974. So
in the police?
In the police. So all of the police data...
Did we have computers in 1974?
We did. We had huge machines that would have filled the room. And those are still the same machines we use now, because the government can't look in the long run, and it can't invest...
I am flabbergasted at that, Maxwell.
Well, it can't invest for the long run to change these things. Look at NP Fit, the national programme for IT and healthcare. It failed massively, and now we're stuck with legacy systems. Remember, what was the last user of fax machines in Europe? The NHS.
The NHS still has pagers. They still use... I think they're just about the only people in the country that do use pagers.
Do you know what's so frustrating as well, and you'll know about this, the Growth Commission, Liz Truss.
Yes.
We need growth, growth, growth. She arguably spoilt her chance. But this is what could pay for this infrastructure, is economic growth, and we're seeing none of that. Instead, we're seeing stagflation.
Exactly, exactly. We're back to the 1970s again, guys. It's going to get very, very bad. And the strikes are back, the inflation's back, the lack of growth is there, and we need to fix it by firing Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England, because he's really ruined what we've got, and also and also build more houses, build more lab space, build more infrastructure. Politicians aren't going to do it because they'll upset their core voting base.
Well, what a cheery way to end this conversation.
I was thinking exactly the same thing. It's not all doom and gloom. We'll find some good news somewhere.
And indeed, you mentioned, Emily, there, the Growth Commission. We're going to speak to a member of the
are we
Commission
now?
in just a moment. But Maxwell Marlowe, Director of Research at the Adam Smith Institute, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And actually, let's get more on the economy now. Let's go to Julian Jessup, who is, of course, at the Institute for Economic Affairs, but also a member of this new Growth Commission. And Julian, just before we begin talking, because we're going to talk to you about mortgages and that very worrying situation. Yeah. But first of all, what is the Growth Commission?
Well, it's a group of international economists and other specialists who've been brought together by Liz Truss to look at the problem of slow growth, not just in the UK, but actually around much of the Western world, including the rest of Europe. The lack of growth is a real problem. Without stronger growth, we can't afford the vital public services that we need. We're unlikely to have the sort of technological progress and innovation that we need to tackle the environmental problems that we face. And it's going to be very difficult to keep real wages and living standards up. So growth needs to be absolutely central to government policy making, but recently it hasn't been. It's all about sort of short-term fiscal targets and tinkering at the margins, and we've lost that sort of emphasis on growth as being the key thing that the economy needs.
Of course, interlinked with this issue of growth is the housing crisis that we're seeing. It's become more and more of a political issue as well. Keir Starmer mentions it every week at Prime Minister's Questions, or Angela Rayner for the last 2 weeks, so it's been Deputy Prime Minister's Questions. But Julian, we wanted to talk to you about mortgages and the default rates that we've been seeing, because we're seeing the biggest increase in mortgage defaults now since 2009. That sounds to me like a crisis.
Well, I mean, first of all, you're right. All of these stories are linked. You're talking earlier about inflation, and it's higher inflation, which is why interest rates are going up. You talked about the housing crisis, and part of that is simply because we've not been building enough houses, because of the constraints of the planning system. That's something that the Growth Commission will be looking at. In terms of the increases in mortgage interest rates and default rates in particular, so far, this isn't yet a sort of economy-wide crisis. Yes, you're right, the number of defaults has increased, but it's still pretty low compared to previous crises. And I think, trying to be optimistic, there are a couple of reasons to think that this won't be a complete disaster. One is that the jump in mortgage rates is based on where the markets expect official interest rates to go. And I think they have become a bit too pessimistic there. I think that inflation will fall sharply, so the Bank of England won't have to raise interest rates as much as people fear, and therefore mortgage rates might actually start falling again fairly soon. The second point is that I think the risk of repossessions is a lot lower during this crisis than in previous ones. I think the last thing that a lender wants to do is to repossess a house. That's not the business that they're in. So I think lenders will be a bit more flexible to people who are having difficulty paying their debts. There is a new mortgage charter that's been voluntarily agreed by the big lenders, which I think will help there. So we're undoubtedly facing a very difficult period, and I've got huge sympathy for people whose mortgage costs are jumping. But I don't think this is going to drag down the economy as a whole.
Thank you very much indeed, Julian. Julian Jessup from the Institute of Economic Affairs and a member of that Growth Commission. I mean, he's a bit optimistic there. I fear, people's mortgages are doubling. A lot of people simply aren't going to be able to afford it, even if they move on to interest only, even if they get a little bit of support from their bank. The numbers just aren't going to add up.
But this is what interest rates are all about. The age-old quote is, if it isn't hurting, it isn't working.
Well, I don't think they're working.
There's no easy way to get out of inflation.
They don't seem to be working. I was talking to Roger Gavolb, who is a friend of the show. He thinks it's the wrong move from the Bank of England to be raising the interest rates, because that's not how he sees the current inflation working. So you see...
Yeah. No, interesting.
Debate to be had.
Lots of debate to be had, and lots more to come on this programme. Indeed, still to come, the government has been given the go-ahead to take a legal battle over its Rwanda deportation policy to the Supreme Court. But will we ever see a flight take off? We'll find out after the weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Some lively weather crossing the country over the next couple of days. A blustery spell with some wet weather around, and it doesn't feel very warm, certainly not for July. This chart is more typical of maybe October or November. A deep low pressure spreading rain steadily northwards and some gusty winds, particularly over southwest England and West Wales, and seasonably windy, and that rain spreading north. That'll be heavy and persistent across Northern Ireland. Very wet afternoon here. Not raining everywhere. Parts of northeast England, southern Scotland and the far north may stay largely dry. But it is getting blustery, and it is on the cool side with temperatures struggling in the teens and feeling very chilly with that persistent rain over the east of Northern Ireland into this evening. That rain spiralling across Scotland, so a very wet night here. For England and Wales, it does turn drier through this evening. There'll be some clear spells overnight, but staying pretty gusty with more showers coming into the west. Temperatures mostly holding up in the teens. On to Saturday, and it's more of a case of sunshine and showers, but it will be a blustery day. Again, unseasonably windy, particularly over parts of the south and east of England. So again, Met Office warning in place. Lots of heavy showers as well. They will zip through because it's so windy, but those showers are likely to turn into thunderstorms in places and drop a lot of rain in a short space of time. And again, with all the wind and the showers, it's not warm.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant the Big Green, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It is coming up to 10:27 in the morning. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver and Tom Harwood.
And the government has been given the go-ahead to take a legal battle over its Rwanda deportation policy to the Supreme Court. But the Immigration Minister has warned that there will be no further compromises on government plans to tackle this small boat crisis.
So where does this leave us?
Well, the barrister Stephen Barrett can join us now. He writes for The Spectator as well. And Stephen, a lot of people will be thinking, what on earth is this parliamentary ping-pong we keep hearing about, where legislation goes to and from the Democratic House and the undemocratic House before it can actually become law? Where are we with that?
Well, that is... I mean, we have seen the process whereby the House of Lords has become increasingly political. That's fair to say. So constitutionally, we used to have what you think of as neutral peers, neutral members of the House of Lords, and they were always called crossbenchers. And what the crossbench now has morphed much more into something like a political party. So it's quite clear that they have very strong political opinions and they don't like the government's efforts to control migration. Now, that's their private and personal political opinion, and they are affecting it through their role in the Lords. Quite how far that can go constitutionally is a very big question. The fact that they call it ping pong, I think, should reassure your viewers, because it does mean that ultimately they know they're going to lose. If they called it a battle or a war, then it would be serious. Admitting it's just ping pong is sort of an admission that really they are just messing around.
Stephen, yes, it is the House of Commons and the government who are ultimately in control. But I just want to ask about the House of Lords and their processes, because they are there to scrutinise legislation proposed by the government. That is their job. But is there a line to be drawn between scrutinising legislation and suggesting amendments that could improve the legislation, and the sort of wrecking amendments that we see from the likes of Shami Chakrabarti, for example, on this particular bill? But we've seen it with others. Where's that line? Where do you think that line should be?
Well, there is such a line, and you're very right to highlight it. Their job is to review and scrutinise. It's actually very important that they read everything. I'm not entirely clear that, and maybe I should be kinder to the House of Lords, I'm not entirely clear that the House of Commons is reading everything. And really, our system requires everybody to read everything and pay, proper attention to what they are doing. There seems to me to have been an over-reliance on officials and not necessarily the attention to detail that one expects. But yes, properly functioning, the House of Lords is a reviewing chamber, and it would provide wisdom and guidance to the House of Commons. So in the idea, but putting it very practically, the House of Commons does the first draft. It tries its absolute best to get it right. And then the House of Lords comes in and says, well, I think actually here you've made a small, could we make a tweak here and could we make a tweak there? You are quite right to highlight that instead, they've been moving more towards wrecking amendments and moving more towards deliberately frustrating government policy, which is a very curious thing for the unelected House to start doing.
Let's talk a little bit about the Supreme Court now, because the government wants to take its separate Rwanda policy to the Supreme Court now. There was a judgment at the Court of Appeal, which was a split judgment, but did strike down the government. The government thinks it can win on appeal to the Supreme Court. Can it?
Yes, absolutely. And it's right that you highlight it was a split decision. So the Court of Appeal has 3 judges, and the Rwanda plan lost 2-1. The one is a very respectable and highly gifted lawyer, so his opinion shouldn't be completely dismissed just because he was outvoted. That's not to criticise the other 2 either. But you sometimes in public life, in particular, we've reached a very binary position where everything is absolutely extreme, and so the fact that his opinion is outvoted, it doesn't mean that it should be dismissed. The 2 who went against the government are basing it on the idea that Rwanda's own internal proceedings are not sophisticated enough or not developed enough, particularly the level of training that their civil servants have been given. That seems to me to be the absolute minutiae of detail. And the Court of Appeal, really, the 2 who went against the government, really lent very, very heavily on UN agencies. And I'm not entirely clear that will survive. Certainly, it would be. I think what we're witnessing is the end, really, of the public lawyer as a big force in our society, because as parliamentary sovereignty returns after Brexit, really it starts being what I was taught. So when I was at university, public law, I wasn't taught public law. It was called administrative law. And we called it admin. And it is a question of, is the government complying with all of the details? Is it crossing the T's and dotting the I's?
Rather than doing this sort of advocacy stuff. Stephen, thank you so much for talking us through all of that. We're going to have to leave it there and get to the news headlines.
We could chat all day, couldn't we, Stephen?
Really could. We'll have you back very, very soon. Stephen Barrett there, barrister and indeed writer.
Let us know what you think about that. Do you think this bill is going to get through? Do you think the government has got enough time? Do you think the Lords is, well, behaving badly?
Lots more to talk about, but first, your headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you. A very good morning. It's 10:33. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Junior doctors in England have said they're in it for the long run on day 2 of their 5-day strike. That's despite the government's offer of a 6% pay rise, which the Prime Minister says is final. The British Medical Association says more strikes are possible. They want an offer closer to the 12.4% given to junior doctors in Scotland. People have been forced to pull out their own teeth because they can't access or afford NHS care. A new report by the Health and Social Care Committee found 10% of people admitted to attempting DIY dentistry. It's calling for urgent and fundamental reform. The NHS says it's already started making changes, including to contracts with dentists. A breakthrough may have been made in a bid to unlock Boris Johnson's old mobile phone after an ally suggested the government had recovered a PIN code. The deadline to hand over unredacted messages to the COVID inquiry was missed this week. The device likely contains content relating to the ordering of lockdowns as well as details on the early response to the coronavirus pandemic. And almost 1,000 workers at Gatwick Airport, including baggage handlers and check-in staff, will stage 8 days of strikes later this month. Unite Union says it's because of an ongoing pay dispute. Workers will walk out for 4 days from Friday the 28th, then again from Friday the 4th of August. Airlines affected include British Airways, EasyJet, Ryanair, TUI, WestJet and Wizz Air. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.3140 and €1.1691. The price of gold is £1,489.32 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,447 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to. by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It is 10:39 in the morning. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Emily Carver, that's me, and Tom Harwood.
That's me. But let's get stuck into our next story now, straight away. The Education Secretary, we had her on a little bit earlier on the programme. Well, Gillian Keegan has announced that students looking to work in the UK's growing space sector will be able to gain degree-level industry qualifications without suffering tuition fees.
Yes, that sounds very interesting indeed. So who have we got to speak to?
Well, we are going to speak to someone who is an expert in all things space, someone who's gone through astronaut training, no less. Per Wimmer joins us now. Per, thank you for being on the show. I think a lot of people will think of space as something that is American, Russian or Chinese. Or, as we're seeing in the papers today, actually, the Indians are going to sending a rover to the moon as well. Does Britain have a role in space?
Absolutely. Britain has a big role to play, and I would like Britain to have an even bigger role. So therefore, I think today's announcement is absolutely fantastic. Not only is it the right thing to do, because it's technology, it's the future of the economy, space also has an enormous power to inspire young kids to do the right things, to get excited about engineering. And that is our future livelihood for the next generation. So it is super important. And if you look at the numbers, the size of the global space market is about $190 billion. Wow. It's enormous. The UK only picks up about 8% of that today. We got to increase that. And the global space market over the next 10 years is going to double to about 400 billion. So we got to seize that opportunity. And for that, you need people and you need educated people. So that's why we got to be ready.
Now, Per, for those listening on the radio, you are dressed in what looks like training gear.
Yes, absolutely. This is my flight suit, which I use when I do my weightlessness training, meaning when you go into a specially built airplane.
A vomit comet.
A vomit comet, as they call it, absolutely. Where you fly up to about 16 kilometers and then you nosedive down for 30, 40 seconds at a time, become weightless because you are accelerating at the acceleration of gravity on the way down. So 30, 40 seconds, you get to float and feel like you're in space. So
How many
great
times
training.
have you done that?
I've done it many times. I've done it on the Airbus in France. I've done it on the 727 in the US, and I've done the Ilyushin 76 in Russia. So I've tried the different models of it. So I've done it a great number of times, and it's equally fun each time.
Well, there you go. Now, I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a child. I thought it looked quite fun. Is that the only job going? What other jobs are going when it comes to space?
Oh, there's a whole. I mean, for the astronaut just to go up into space. I mean, there's a forest of people beneath that.
What kind of things?
Everything from engineering, from people who do all the paperwork, quite frankly, to you need biologists. You need people who can actually do the things up there once you're up there. Geologists, if you go to the moon. Hopefully, we're going to go back to the moon soon. You need people with all sorts of technical and scientific skills to make this thing happen. It's not just about the rockets. It's not just about the astronauts. There's a lot of scientific education that goes on behind it.
Now, people might remember there was a bit of a failed launch down in the southwest of England not that long ago, where, was it Virgin Galactic was trying to, or Virgin Orbit?
Virgin Orbit, yeah, which is different company, yeah.
Was trying to get a small satellite up into space. But we've got 6 or 7 spaceports in the United Kingdom now. Is the biggest opportunity about these small satellites that will help with sort of telephone communication and internet access and all the rest of it?
100%. The satellite business is actually a huge business and very growing business. So putting stuff up there is a great business, and it's bigger than putting people up there, quite frankly.
Cheaper as well.
And it's cheaper as well.
Who knew you
and they
were
don't
such
complain.
a space expert,
I
Tom?
love space, honestly. Every SpaceX launch, I'm there, I'm watching the count down. I absolutely adore it all.
I do really like watching those takeoffs, the 10, 9, 8, 7, and then seeing if they make it.
The Starship takeoff that happened very recently, especially when it blew up. That's sometimes the most, as long as no one's aboard.
We do like to see that sometimes, don't we?
Yeah, well,
Very
Pearl,
odd.
thank you so much for coming in and talking about all things space. It's totally fascinating, and really appreciate your time this morning.
See you up
very
there.
much.
See you up there.
Right, well, should we go back to some of our inbox?
Perhaps we should ask, would you like to go to space? Would you like to go to space, Emily?
Well, I did, but I actually have a bit of motion sickness, so I don't think I'd last very long. I mean, I can't even get in a back of a car without feeling a bit queasy.
Well, gbviews at gbnews.com is the address. But also, of course, we were asking you earlier this morning about phones in pub, with the news that this pub, where is it? Where's the pub? It's
Cheshire.
in Cheshire.
Where Harry Styles, the pop star sensation, grew up.
So, someone emailed in saying, why does that matter? Who's Harry Styles?
Our producer told us that this is it's the strongest element of the story is that Harry Styles lives in this village where phones are being banned in the Swan Inn.
Yes, well, a number of people have been writing in saying that actually there are lots of pubs that have been banning phones for quite some time. Perhaps we're behind the times on this. Indeed, Linda has written in to say the Harewood Arms, very good name, near me has banned phones for quite some time. They don't have TV screens either. Again, relying on that art of conversation.
But Lynn does make a good point. Does this include laptops as well? Quite a lot of people actually work from pubs. I think Tom quite likes working from pubs, believe it or not. Working from pub. That's us. Anyway.
Yeah, it's much better than working from home, I think. But let's get on and talk about some other big stories today. Reviewing some of the day's top stories is the actor and presenter Christopher Biggins, and indeed the deputy comment editor of the Daily Telegraph, Annabelle Denham. Thank you so much for both being here. Shall we start with you, Annabelle? Actually, what's the top story you've picked out today?
I think the top story I've picked out is the actual top story on the cover of most newspapers. This, of course, is the pay offer that the government has agreed to hand to public sector workers. And there's a lot of debate now over whether this represents a good deal. I happen to think that it does. Certainly, teaching unions seem to agree. They've agreed to drop industrial action. It's the BMA that is standing firm. It's digging its heels in. So I think we can expect further strikes. Of course, we're in the middle of a very long period of industrial action, of walkouts from junior doctors and consultants. I think there's a reasonable argument to be made that we haven't got any money left because we spent it all during lockdown. Most people would sympathise with the idea that we should pay NHS frontline staff more, but you have to ask, how are we going to pay for it? And this brings me on to why this is a good deal for the government, this 6.5% across the board. And that's because it's going to be funded by cuts to government spending. So there will be cuts to departmental spending. I think across the board, we don't yet know the details. Perhaps certain areas will be ring-fenced. Certainly they were during the austerity period. We had the NHS and education ring-fenced. But Rishi Sunak is absolutely right that this cannot be funded by more borrowing, and it cannot be funded by higher taxes.
Again, it's that economic reality. There's no such thing as free money. Like, taxes have to go up, or spending has to come down, or we borrow more, thereby pushing inflation higher. I mean, there's no good option here.
No, that's absolutely right. I think the problem is most people would have agreed with this before the lockdown, but then there was this £400 billion that appeared to be magicked up out of nowhere. That magic money tree that we were told doesn't exist. We cannot go into the garden of the Bank of England and start shaking it. Suddenly it did magically appear, and people believed that when they were facing some kind of hardship, when they perhaps were in the public sector and wanted pay rises, the government would be able to fund it, because look at what it did during the lockdown. Not perhaps fully realising that ultimately what the government did during lockdown was borrow from our future selves, and we're now paying it back with higher taxes and lower wages. This is the economic reality. We cannot borrow our way out of the current wage crisis.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, we're learning again trade-offs, aren't we? Which we'd forgotten, perhaps, during the lockdown.
What a cheery note to kick off the paper review. But Christopher Biggins, do you have anything that can lighten the mood?
Well, my story story is in the Mail today, and the headline is, now Sadiq Khan wants to hit the motorists with a pay per mile.
Oh, more doom and gloom.
And if he was here, I'd like to hit him, actually, because it's just ludicrous what he's trying to do. I mean, we all know that we must do something about the pollution that's going on, but you can't hit the motorists. What I think he should do, funny enough, is ban all cars from central London. Ban them completely, then he'll see that he has no money to play with. And in fact, he's going to have to find a lot of money to do everything else he wants to do.
Isn't there an issue here that there's a difference between central London and outer London? Outer London, a lot of people rely on cars all the time, but in the very centre, does anyone drive a car?
I do.
Really?
Well, I've got an electric car.
Down Oxford Street?
Yes, I've got an electric car. I'm very out there now with driving, and I've had an electric car for 8 years. And, of course, the trouble is, that's the wrong thing to go with. I mean, we should have gone with water or something ridiculous, you know, because it's so... In the end, we're going to run out of electricity.
Tom, what do you think? That we should just pedestrianise the entirety of Zone 1 and 2?
So I grew up in Cambridge, where basically that's happened. In the centre of Cambridge, you can get taxis and buses, but you can't really drive through it. It's a very small area, but I don't think that's a bad idea.
But that's Cambridge.
I would like to be able to drive my car into London if I so wish.
Yes, exactly.
It's authoritarian.
Drive up to Zone 1, park outside Zone 1, and then have a lovely walk.
But you can't park anywhere. That's ridiculous.
That is true, I think.
Well,
we don't have anything...
Martin Dobney, who often presents on this channel, he posted that Southwark Council is using parking spaces, and what they're doing with them is making little parks instead. Which look like a hotspot for antisocial behaviour. But anyway, Annabelle, let's move on to a rather odd story. We heard that Diet Coke was going to kill us, and now what?
Now it's not going to kill us unless we consume it in absolutely enormous quantities. Now, I am a big fan of Diet Coke. I have at least 1 can a day. So when I read that it was potentially carcinogenic, it struck fear into my heart. But no, you would have to have 14 cans a day, up to which point it can be safely consumed. And even the report that this was based on from the World Health Organization was suggesting that it would be dangerous with very or low certainty. So essentially what you had was an initial report suggesting that it was dangerous, that there were these adverse effects of consuming artificial sweeteners, and now there has been this subsequent report to say that you can have it in normal quantities.
Christopher, what do you make of this story?
Well, I gave up drinking Diet Coke about 8 years ago. I went to a German health farm, and I used to love Diet Coke. It was, and now I sort of crave it too, you know, but I know it's not good for you. I mean, I think this article is fascinating.
Yeah, you can have 14 cans a day, don't worry.
You can have 13. You can't have... As soon as you have your 14th can...
You're out of it. But, I mean, it's ridiculous, I think, because I don't think it is good for you. I really don't.
Although I do think when I was probably studying for my A-levels or my university exams, I was probably drinking about 14 cans a day just to get through it.
Oh, I was on the Monster. The Red Bull, the sort of extreme energy drinks, which now, bizarrely, I get ID'd for. If I'm like, have you had this? You go into a supermarket, you get ID'd if you buy a can of energy drink now.
Well, clearly, Tom, you just look particularly youthful.
I think the wider problem is that, you know, you're not supposed to enjoy anything that you consume now. So you're not really supposed to drink anything. And we've had this gradual clamping down on drinking limits and recommendations. And the WHO can't seem to make up its mind whether it's, you know, anti-sugar or is it anti-sweetener. And it's sort of oscillated between the two. At one point, it was saying, no, have artificial sweeteners because it'll wean you off sugar. And I think the fundamental problem is a body like the World Health Organization is supposed to be preventing the spread of infectious diseases. And instead, it's indulging in, you know, all of these hobbies around our lifestyles and politics. And, you know, it's expanded its reach. And look where that left us in 2020 when the pandemic struck.
Weren't they trying to dictate the size of our crisp packets at one point? I think I remember that, but hey.
Well, let's get on to our next story now, Christopher. You've picked out something in The Sun.
Have I? Oh, yes, of course I have, yes. I'm so fascinated by that story. I mean, yes, I have, because my dear friend Scott, who was married to Barbara Windsor, 3 years ago, she sadly died, and he's been raising money through Alzheimer's and everything. He's a brilliant, brilliant guy. And he's found love again, which I think is fantastic. He's now with this lovely girl called Tanya, who I've met about 2 weeks ago, and we're going out for dinner in another 2 weeks. But it's so good, because I think we were talking about this in the break. It's good that you find somebody. I mean, I know someone whose husband died, and I said to her brother, she will be married within the next year. And they said, no, 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 no. She went, of course she was, because there are certain people need a man in their life, or a woman, whatever.
But we were having a bit of a controversial debate in the break. I was saying that men tend to move on quicker because they need someone to look after them.
Well, that is very true, I think. That's a very important mention. But I think it's really great, and he's such a great guy. He really is. Why shouldn't he have happiness?
Absolutely. This does sound like an uplifting story, and
it is.
I dare say something that Barbara might have wanted.
Oh, I think without doubt she would have wanted. I mean, they had a wonderful relationship. They were great fun, and it's wonderful now that he's found someone new.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Christopher Biggins and Annabelle Denham, taking us through the top stories. Now, in the next few moments, we'll find out the decision of the RAF Scampton and whether plans to house 2,000 asylum seekers will be halted. We've got more to come in the next hour.
Yes, absolutely. We're waiting for that decision, coming, I believe, at 11 o'clock. So don't go anywhere. This is GB News.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Some lively weather crossing the country over the next couple of days. A blustery spell with some wet weather around, and it doesn't feel very warm, certainly not for July. This chart is more typical of maybe October or November. A deep low pressure spreading rain steadily northwards and some gusty winds, particularly over southwest England and West Wales, and seasonably windy, and that rain spreading north. That'll be heavy and persistent across Northern Ireland. Very wet afternoon here. Not raining everywhere. Parts of northeast England, southern Scotland and the far north may stay largely dry. But it is getting blustery, and it is on the cool side with temperatures struggling in the teens and feeling very chilly with that persistent rain over the east of Northern Ireland into this evening. That rain spiralling across Scotland, so a very wet night here. For England and Wales, it does turn drier through this evening. There'll be some clear spells overnight, but staying pretty gusty with more showers coming into the west. Temperatures mostly holding up in the teens. On to Saturday, and it's more of a case of sunshine and showers, but it will be a blustery day. Again, unseasonably windy, particularly over parts of the south and east of England. So again, Met Office warning in place. Lots of heavy showers as well. They will zip through because it's so windy, but those showers are likely to turn into thunderstorms in places and drop a lot of rain in a short space of time. And again, with all the wind and the showers, it's not warm.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant would read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11 a.m. on Friday the 14th of July, and this is Britain's Newsroom, here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and this week, Emily Carver.
Now, we're expecting a decision on whether the challenge against RAF Scampton housing asylum seekers will go ahead to a full hearing any moment now, and we'll bring it to you once we get it.
Expected very soon, but the public sector staff are set to get a pay rise of around 6%. But what does that actually mean, and will they feel it on the front line? We'll speak to a junior doctor live on the programme.
And are we set for yet another summer of travel misery? Almost 1,000 workers at Gatwick have announced they will strike this summer. Overpay, goodness me. Yes, and you've been getting in touch on our fun question of the day, which is, should we ban mobile phones in pubs? That's because one pub up in Cheshire, where Harry Styles is from, no less, has decided to ban them.
Although quite a lot of people have been getting in touch to say their local also bans phones. Does yours? And should they? gbviews@gbnews.com is the address. We'll get to that and all of the other big stories of the day coming up after your headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, good morning. It's 1 minute past 11, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Junior doctors in England have said they're in it for the long run on day 2 of their 5-day strike. That's despite the government's offer of a 6% pay rise, which the Prime Minister says is final. The British Medical Association says more strikes are possible. They want an offer closer to the 12.4% given to junior doctors in Scotland. Meanwhile, all 4 teaching unions have called for their strikes to be cancelled, saying members should accept the 6.5% pay rise they've been offered. The Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, told GB News how it's being funded.
The Treasury, what they usually do with departments is any spend that you don't
you don't make. So if your forecast is too high, or you don't deliver as quickly as you thought, and all of those underspends, they always go back to the Treasury, and then they reprioritise on behalf of the government. But in this case, they've permitted us to keep those underspends. So what I've been doing is going through line by line every bit of the budget, looking at the forecast, looking at the programmes that we haven't started yet, we could slow down, and that's how we've done it.
Almost 1,000 workers at Gatwick Airport, including baggage handlers and check-in staff, will stage 8 days of strikes later this month. Unite Union says they're because of ongoing pay disputes. Workers will walk out for 4 days from Friday the 28th, then again from Friday the 4th of August for another 4 days. Airlines affected include British Airways, EasyJet, Ryanair, TUI, WestJet and Wizz Air. People have been forced to pull out their own teeth because they can't access or afford NHS care. A new report by the Health and Social Care Committee found 10% of people admitted to attempting DIY dentistry. It says the evidence of pain and distress is totally unacceptable in the 21st century. It's calling for urgent and fundamental reform. The NHS says it's already started making changes, including to contracts with dentists. Experts have said it is still safe to consume aspartame in limited quantities. That's despite it being declared a possible cause of cancer. The sweetener is used in everything from fizzy drinks to cough sweets and even toothpaste. But the World Health Organization says the average person would need to drink 14 cans of a diet soft drink a day to exceed safe levels. A breakthrough may have been made in a bid to unlock Boris Johnson's old mobile phone after an ally suggested the government had recovered a PIN code. The deadline to hand over unredacted messages to the COVID inquiry was missed this week due to complications accessing the former Prime Minister's phone. The device likely contains content relating to the ordering of lockdowns, as well as details on the early response to the coronavirus pandemic. The government has already handed over the rest of Mr Johnson's documents following a High Court order, having initially argued it was irrelevant. King Charles and Queen Camilla's coronation outfits are going on display for the very first time. Items from the King's coronation will be open to the public at Buckingham Palace from today. The display includes the gold St Edward's crown that was used in the ceremony and the Diamond Jubilee state coach that brought King Charles to the Abbey. A coroner has ruled that Lisa Marie Presley died from an obstruction in her small bowel caused by scar tissue from a weight loss surgery. The singer-songwriter and Elvis Presley's only child died in January after days after attending the Golden Globes. She'd had bariatric surgery several years ago. The development of adhesions are a known long-term risk of the procedure. Hollywood actors have joined a strike by screenwriters for the first time in 60 years. Some 160,000 performers stopped work at midnight in Los Angeles, bringing to a halt most US film and TV productions. Stars at the London premiere of Oppenheimer left early in a show of solidarity with the Screen Actors Guild. As well as a pay rise, actors want guarantees AI versions of their likeness won't be used to replace them without permission or payment. And tourists are being warned to take care in the extreme heat as temperatures across southern Europe and northwest Africa topped 40 degrees Celsius. The Cerberus heatwave has taken hold of popular British holiday hotspots in the Mediterranean. Wildfires in Croatia, sparked by a combination of strong winds and heat, have burned houses to the ground. Weather alerts are in place across Spain's Canary Islands, Italy, Cyprus and Greece, where authorities expect temperatures to reach up to 43 degrees Celsius. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back over to Tom and Emily.
Very good morning. This is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News. And let's get stuck into one of the biggest stories that we are covering today. Rishi Sunak has offered pay rises of around 6% to millions of public sector workers, including doctors and teachers. This all in a bid to end those devastating strikes.
But ministers and unions continue their face-off as junior doctors prepare to strike for a second day, despite being made a final offer salary rise.
Well, GB News national reporter Paul Hawkins joins us now from St Thomas's Hospital in London.
Oh dear!
It looks a little wet where you are, Paul. Are you? I suppose you're. Anyway, let's stick
Just
to the
for our
story.
radio listeners, Paul is looking very soggy indeed outside St Thomas's Hospital in London.
But Paul, give us the details on what the government has offered and indeed what the staff are saying about it.
Yeah, so morning to you all from quite a soggy central London. Look, simple facts are the government said we can offer you 6%, you're not getting any more, there's not going to be any more talks, that's the final offer, accept it, and we can all move on from this. Junior doctors are saying, no, we want 35% pay rise to make up for 15 years of real-term cuts, they say, and they say that's the reason why so many junior doctors are opting to leave the service. There was one BMA survey at the end of December that said a third of junior doctors, once they finish their training, which takes around 7 years, want to leave the NHS. They want to go and work abroad, where they say it's the healthcare system's a better resource, places like Australia, and they get paid more. Why wouldn't you want to go and work abroad? So that's why they're asking for 35%. The government's saying the money simply isn't there. We'll fund 6%. We won't do it through borrowing. We'll do it through what we call reprioritisation. Some unions may call that cuts. But the junior doctors are looking for a 35% pay increase. And we spoke to one one junior, I should say, medical professional who works in the hospital. He works with junior doctors earlier, and he told us that he thinks they should be given that 35% pay cut. This is what he had to say.
I think that, the junior doctors should be paid a fair amount because they are contributing significantly towards our healthcare system, and they had such extensive training in their medical school, and the fact that, they are working on calls, flat out 24 hours a day. They're providing extensive service to our patients because, we're living in an aging population, and the medical conditions of the patients are getting more complex. So that's why the junior doctors are so vital in providing that extra support.
But no one would deny that, but they want 35% pay increase, and the government's saying it's 6% and that's your final offer. Do you think 35% is too much? A lot of people, Rishi Sunak sends no more money.
Yeah, I think that they deserve that percentage, and I agree with whatever percentage that they are being offered. If it's to that high level, they should be given that.
So that's what one of the junior doctors' colleagues told us earlier today. Politically, this is a kind of showdown, really, a bit of a face-off, because Rishi Sunak, as you guys will well know, Rishi Sunak, one of his 5 pledges is to cut waiting lists. We know that at the end of May, that rose from 7.42 million to 7.47 million people waiting, an actual increase, not a cut, in those waiting for routine treatment. And we know that NHS strikes by healthcare staff so far, the NHS has lost 600,000 appointments, so maybe the unions are gambling that they can just keep this going, in which case Rishi Sunak is going to not end up meeting one of his pledges, and we know that there's a general election on the way next summer.
Big things happening there. Paul Hawkins from outside a slightly damp St Thomas's Hospital. Thank you very much for joining us. But let's get more on this. Joining us in the studio now is junior doctor Basha Mukherjee, and thank you for being with us today. I'm just looking at the numbers a little bit. 6% is the average. Junior doctors are getting anything between 8.1 and 10.3% pay rises, depending where they are in training. Isn't that enough?
I'm not a numbers person. I think that's why the BMA are doing a really grand job of doing the calculations, and this has been a calculation made over, as you've just heard, 15 years of cutbacks. We've been offered 2% rise with a 9% inflation, and that actually puts it at a minus, isn't it? So.
But Basha, you say you're not a numbers person. Is that the problem? I mean, I don't mean to be impolite, but is that the problem? Because is it the case that perhaps junior doctors and the BMA are a little bit out of touch with the current economic landscape? Most people are not going to be getting 35% pay increases. Most people are down in real terms with their wages. That is the state of play. You can blame the government for that, you can blame lockdown for that, you can blame whatever you like for that, but that is where we are currently. And 8.1 to 10.3% or 6% average is pretty reasonable. That is where the private sector is too.
I think it's a case of this hasn't happened overnight. This has happened over years of mistakes made, I guess, by the government in terms of where they've spent the money, and this is why we're at where we're at. The NHS is where it's at because of whatever's been happening over the years. And I think, you know, it won't be an overnight solution as well. Ultimately, it's something, you know, we're seeing a lot of doctors leave the country, 10,000 doctors every year leave the NHS. And that's really sad because all these people are graduating out of medical school and, you know, taking the loans and not paying their loans back effectively. So you're still losing money one way or another. So you're losing the quality of doctors. It takes a lot more money to, you know, fill the gaps essentially and fill the gaps in quality of care and everything else. It's basic corrective action. I mean, we all know that prevention is better than cure.
Are you planning to leave the NHS?
It's definitely something I have considered and thought about and looked into the options. I'm currently in the process of getting my GP qualifications and I'm definitely thinking about what my options are abroad.
It's interesting because one of the big countries that people talk about is Australia.
Yeah.
Which actually, the Australian government spends less on their healthcare than the British government does per person. The difference is made up. They have a much larger private sector. If you're someone on a high income, you are encouraged by the government to take out private insurance. You have a surcharge added to your tax bill if you don't take out private insurance. You're punished by the government if you don't have... And that puts way more private money into the health system, which means that they can afford these bigger pay packets for medical professionals. Is that something we should consider doing here?
It's not just about the money, it's actually also about the quality of the work environment as well, both for the patients who are accessing the care and also people who work in it. I mean, a lot of people say, no, the waiting lists and, you know, 8-hour waiting lists in A&E, it's shocking. But you have to understand, what is it like to work in that environment as well? It's not pleasant. We don't want to be putting patients at risk and, you know, and working with a relentless list that just doesn't end. And by the time you're seeing your patients, they're much worse than they'd been seen a bit earlier. And we're having to basically every day fight an uphill battle to try to combat the cost of losing our doctors.
On that, though, we don't hear very often, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we hear very often from the BMA and other unions about how the NHS could do things better, how it can be sustainable for the future. We see the threats of strike action over pay and working conditions, but what could actually make the NHS better? Because, of course, neither Tom or I or anyone at home wants to see junior doctors leaving and abandoning our health service.
It's a really difficult question because I can tell you from being a frontliner, or whatever you want to call us, the nurses, the clinical staff, and that's the extent of my knowledge, the clinical staff, they are stretched to the absolute limit. There is no way they could possibly do any better because we're already overstretched, taking up
so you
the work
wonder
of
if
other...
because no one would doubt the hard work that is put in by the people who work in the system. The question then becomes, at what point is the system working against the people? Doctors having to fill in too many forms, you know, the way in which this stuff is structured. Can we learn from countries in continental Europe? Can we learn from Australia? Can we learn from Canada in the way they run their health systems?
100%. There's something to be learned from each culture, and I would definitely say it's a very bureaucratic system, and in terms of the weight of paperwork, and we're definitely in a very defensive medicine practice where we're having to do everything to make sure we don't get in trouble, rather than trying to do what the best thing is for the patient.
Just very, very quickly, would you give up some of your pension in order to have more upfront pay day to day?
Well, that wasn't the question asked of the people working 15 years ago. They had equal, I mean, they had better sort of overall holistic sort of, you know, whether it was pay matching up to the inflation as well as the pension. So it's unfair to be asking us to give up things, and they were paying less in university fees.
We'll see what people at home think. Do you think perhaps pensions could be cut in order to boost pay day to day? Because, of course, the NHS workers do receive very generous pensions.
Well, or we could drive for greater efficiency, get rid of some of that paperwork, make the lives of doctors easier if they're doing twice as much work in the same time, because they don't have to fill in out endless forms.
Better IT systems.
Better IT. Stop using pagers, as we were hearing from Maxwell Marlowe a little bit earlier. The 1970s computers that some hospitals still run on. I mean, my goodness. But so much to talk about in this subject. And thank you so much for coming in to talk about a junior doctor's perspective as well. But we'll keep you up to date with all the latest from RAF Scampton and that decision. But before then, let's have a little look at the weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Some lively weather crossing the country over the next couple of days. A blustery spell with some wet weather around, and it doesn't feel very warm, certainly not for July. This chart is more typical of maybe October or November. A deep low pressure spreading rain steadily northwards and some gusty winds, particularly over southwest England and West Wales, and seasonably windy, and that rain spreading north. That'll be heavy and persistent across Northern Ireland. Very wet afternoon here. Not raining everywhere. Parts of northeast England, southern Scotland and the far north may stay largely dry, but it is getting blustery, and it is on the cool side with temperatures struggling in the teens and feeling very chilly with that persistent rain over the east of Northern Ireland into this evening. That rain spiralling across Scotland, so a very wet night here. For England and Wales, it does turn drier through this evening. There'll be some clear spells overnight, but staying pretty gusty with more showers coming into the west. Temperatures mostly holding up in the teens. On to Saturday, and it's more of a case of sunshine and showers, but it will be a blustery day. Again, unseasonably windy, particularly over parts of the south and east of England. So again, Met Office warning in place. Lots of heavy showers as well. They will zip through because it's so windy, but those showers are likely to turn into thunderstorms in places and drop a lot of rain in a short space of time. And again, with all the wind and the showers, it's not warm.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back to Britain's Newsroom here on GB News. And I have to say, that discussion with the junior doctor was fascinating. It's completely lit up our inbox.
It absolutely has. One thing that I saw that was quite interesting was Brian, who said, "How on earth can the BMA seriously demand an increase in pay of 35% for junior doctors? If, as they claim, this is the amount junior doctors' pay has fallen in real terms, then surely that is an admission of failure on the part of the BMA." Yes, they haven't been very good at driving up those salaries, have they?
Well, I mean, I do. The thing is, I do feel sympathy for junior doctors, and everyone works in the NHS. Of course, there has been pay restraint over the last decade or so. But of course, the economic situation of the country over the last decade or so has not been great. I mean, lots of people have seen wages go down as a result of the financial crisis, and building back up again has been difficult. To ask to do it in one go, and at a time of very high inflation, it seems to me the wrong way to go about it. Perhaps a more multi-year settlement would be
I think
a
the
better
pensions. I think it's the pensions. I think that is a great question. I'm glad I asked it.
Yes.
Although the junior doctor there did say that she would like to keep her pension because doctors in the past have had them, which is true too. But I think the other point that I think stuck out to people at home is that she did, bless her, she did say she wasn't a numbers person. And I do think that that is half of the problem. They have really unrealistic ideas of how much we can afford to pay when government debt is at 100% of GDP. And what did we see? That it's projected to be...
To is it 300% in a few decades' time if we continue on these trends? But Emily, someone did really agree with you. Carol wrote in to say, "I believe the pensions should be amended. Pretty much everyone else has had their pensions changed, especially those on final salary. None of us wanted it, but no choice. I don't believe the NHS or indeed anybody else should be treated differently." Ordinary making a very valid point, I think.
Well, yes, some of these pensions can be up to 20%, can't it? Government contribution, which is absolutely massive because the normal ordinary workers, people who don't work in the public sector, about 5% usually you get from your employer, and then the self-employed obviously have to sort it all themselves.
Yeah, no, there are huge inequalities in it, but I do think there was something interesting, very interesting, that she said, which is we could learn from places like Australia, Canada, or indeed continental Europe, who have, of course, universal healthcare, but manage it in a very, very different way from the very top-down way we manage it in the United Kingdom. For example, every single hospital in the UK is nationalised. That's not the case in France, that's not the case in Australia, that's not the case in lots of countries where they are able to pay their staff more.
Now, we've got quite a strong opinion from Stuart, who's written in. He says, "My honest opinion on this is that all doctors on strike should simply be struck off. The simple reason is they are not fulfilling their oath of obligation. Do no harm. They're causing death by group action." What do you say to that?
I mean, it's a strong view. I don't know. I think it would be quite damaging to the NHS if suddenly we struck off however many doctors are on strike. Goodness me, how would we manage for the next... I mean, how long does it take to train a doctor? Well, it doesn't sound like that's the most reasonable suggestion.
I do think it's ironic that a lot of junior doctors and consultants too are moving to places like Australia, which have more insurance-based systems, but there you go.
Yeah. No, I think the important thing to stress is that there are more systems in the world than just the United States and the United Kingdom. There are lots of ways where people can still deliver a universal healthcare system, but managed in a very different way than the NHS is. But yeah, so many... my computer is literally lit up with views. Do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com, on this, and indeed on our perhaps slightly less consequential story about phones being banned in pubs. We're interested to hear your views on
Just
all
on
of the
that, just
above.
on that, we were saying that so many pubs are banning mobile phones. Steve has said one of our local pubs in Deal used to fine mobile phone users.
That's extreme. That's extreme. Well, moving on, legal moves to prevent 2,000 asylum seekers being housed at RAF Scampton, the famed base of the dam busters, continues at the High Court today.
Yes, the hearing is to determine whether the case can proceed to a full judicial review, potentially halting the Home Office's plans for the former base in Lincolnshire to house asylum seekers. A decision is expected soon.
Well, let's get some analysis from the former leader of the United Kingdom Independence Party, Henry Bolton, OBE. Henry, we haven't yet got the decision. We were expecting it around 11 o'clock.
Yes, it's a bit late.
It seems like they're taking their time. Do you have any insight in terms of why this is perhaps such a difficult decision?
There are various things about this that might be complicating it. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, has got an issue with a comment that was made by the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, being used in the trial. It's sort of to do with sort of freedom of speech, if you like, within the Parliament or within parliamentary debates. But anyway, so that might be a problem. But I suspect this is just really, crossing a few T's and dotting a few I's. That hence the delay. I wouldn't necessarily read anything into it. But my big issue with this, and it's not just Scampton. Scampton's got the profile, but there's RAF Wethersfield, there's sites in South Wales and so on. And the problem here is that the Home Office and the government is simply trying to move or fill up bed spaces, find and fill up bed spaces. And that is simply not a sustainable strategy. If you are going to allow the flow to continue, the inflow, then you're going to have this problem going on and on and on. And it simply doesn't add up. And in terms of the delays in the Lords, the House of Lords, if I can mention that, generally the immigration bill that's going through Parliament at the moment is, in my view...
Oh, no.
Oh, no. Henry, we'll try and get Henry Bolton back as soon as we can. But
I really wanted to ask him about whether local councils in general are feeling a little bit emboldened to try and take on the Home Office, because the Home Office seem to have full-on power to be able to decide where migrants are placed, where they are housed. But now it seems like the councils across the country are actually rising up a little bit.
But it is interesting. Ultimately, there are lots of asylum seekers here. My view is it's much better to put them on an old RAF base than in a hotel, in a seaside resort, in a town. If these people are here, and my gosh, it takes far too long to process these people, they should be processed in less than a week, but it's taking years.
Hang on, Tom. This RAF base, they wanted a regeneration programme. They were promised millions of pounds for this exciting new, to make it a tourist attraction, and you're just saying, oh, well, it can just be used.
Well, I mean, for the meantime, while it hasn't got this regeneration going, I mean, ultimately, what we do need to do is get this backlog down, and then we don't have to use any of these spaces. But while we have people in this country that need to be housed, don't put them in hotels. I think this is a sensible halfway step.
It is maddening, though. The entire thing, the backlog, the failure to stop the boats. It goes on and on.
Well, we'll be, of course, bringing you the decision as soon as we get it. Clearly, some wrangling going on behind the scenes. We'll be keeping our eyes on that. And we'll be live in Taunton for the funeral of Barnaby Webber, one of those students who was killed as a victim in the Nottingham attacks last month. We'll have all of that after your morning news.
Good morning. It's 11:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. Junior doctors in England have said they're in it for the long run on day 2 of their 5-day strike. That's despite the government's offer of a 6% pay rise, which the Prime Minister says is final. The British Medical Association says more strikes are possible. They want an offer closer to the 12.4% given to junior doctors in Scotland. People have been forced to pull out their own teeth because they can't access or afford NHS care. A new report by the Health and Social Care Committee found 10% of people admitted to attempting DIY dentistry. It's calling for urgent and fundamental reform. The NHS says it's already started making changes, including to contracts with dentists. A breakthrough may have been made in a bid to unlock Boris Johnson's old mobile phone after an ally suggested the government had recovered a PIN code. The deadline to hand over unredacted messages to the COVID inquiry was missed this week. The device likely contains content relating to the ordering of lockdowns, as well as details on the early response to the coronavirus pandemic. And almost 1,000 workers at Gatwick Airport, including baggage handlers and check-in staff, will stage 8 days of strikes later this month. Unite Union says it's because of ongoing pay disputes. Workers will walk out for 4 days from Friday the 28th, then again from Friday the 4th of August. Airlines affected include British Airways, EasyJet, Ryanair, TUI, WestJet and Wizz Air. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.3106 and €1.1675. The price of gold is £1,492.49 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,443 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It has just turned 11:37. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Harwood and me, Emily Carver.
Yeah, and we're pleased to be joined now to review some of this news. And my gosh, there's been a lot of news today. Some of it serious, some of it less serious. But we're joined by the actor and presenter Christopher Biggins and the deputy comment editor at the Daily Telegraph, Annabelle Denham. So let's discuss all of these latest headlines. Shall we dive in with you, Annabelle, first? What have you picked out?
Sure, this is on the cover of the Daily Telegraph. It's the IMF warning that COVID will hurt education for years. This is globally. It's going to hold back economic growth through lost skills acquisition, lost learning. We know from data from the Institute for Fiscal Studies that came out recently that the 8.7 million pupils in the UK who missed school will miss out on around 350 billion in lifetime earnings between them. So it's an absolutely astronomical figure. And I think that, you know, this is just the cost of lockdown. Where we've got this public inquiry underway, and I wonder whether we are going to be asking the right questions, whether we're going to look at the economic and social costs of, not to mention the health costs of lockdown. And when it comes to education, of course, there's the loss of lifetime earnings, but you've also got this widening attainment gap, the fact that it hurt underprivileged children the most, and of course the fact that they haven't been able to catch up. So we've had the industrial action, which has meant that children have missed even more schools, and I think that lockdown combined with those strikes has changed attitudes for some people. You know, pupils are feeling as though if teachers are not going to bother to come into the school, then why should they? Or if the government doesn't deem education important enough to keep the schools open during lockdown, then how important is it really?
That's a very good point. With the Telegraph has been reporting on it, I believe, on the ghost children who never went back to school. I imagine that is still afflicting, well, young people and schools.
Yeah, pupil absences in England are on the rise.
And yeah, it's shocking stuff.
But also the mess that happened over exams, not just 1 year, but 2 years in a row, they couldn't get it right. And I just think this is bizarre. It's hard to think of a more socially distanced activity than these desks that sit 2 metres apart anyway. It's social distancing before social distancing existed. Why couldn't they do it?
No, and it's not, of course, just a problem in our schools, but also in our universities. So you have these graduates who are unable to graduate. They're not able to get their certificates. They're not able to enter into the jobs market. We've absolutely hammered an entire generation of young people. We've filled them with a sense of despair. They are entering the labour market at an extremely difficult time anyway, but to do so without their qualifications under their belt, you know, how are these people supposed to survive?
Well, a jolly story to kick us off. Let's turn to you, Christopher. What have you picked out today?
I'm so glad I'm older.
Yeah?
Do you know what I mean? I'd hate to be young. I mean, it was just a disaster. Anyway, my story is a fabulous story.
Oh, yeah?
Because it's in the Mail and patients are pulling their own teeth because there's a shortage of NHS dentists.
I mean, I'm not sure I'd use the word fabulous, Christopher, but that's horrifying.
But, you know, I think people are so desperate. I mean, one hears about these stories, putting twine around the tooth that's affecting them and then putting the other end on a door handle and then slamming the door and hopefully out that tooth will form. You did it, though, didn't you, at an early age?
Well, I thought that was what people did when they were children. When this was, you know, your teeth are falling out anyway, and your parents want to hasten the process, then they put a bit of string on and tie it to a door handle.
I never did that, but I remember wiggling my teeth. And
we all did that.
Yeah, I wanted the money from the tooth fairy.
Yeah.
Which
you were incentivised.
Perhaps that's some way we can fund these public sector pay increases. I
What
don't
did
know.
you get, by the way, for the tooth fairy?
I think it was £1.
Yeah,
I think it was a pound under my
pound, I think.
But I remember whoever the tooth fairy might have been presented it in a wonderful way. The tooth was sort of sellotaped to a bit of card. There was money and a note attached from the tooth fairy. It was all, and I would wake up in the morning with...
Do you think it was one of your parents?
No, it's the tooth fairy.
Oh, it was a tooth fairy, yes, of course. How stupid of me. Yes,
It was the tooth fairy, but I'd like to know at home, has anyone watching and listening to us ever pulled out their tooth?
Well,
I'd like to know that.
We'll leave that question hanging, and we will return to this pay-per-view in a moment, because we've got some updates now on asylum seeker housing and that hearing. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, joins us live now from the Royal Courts of Justice. Mark.
Yes, good news for those fighting plans to have asylum seekers housed at RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire, the former Dam Busters base. The High Court here has ruled that the council, the local council, West Lindsey District Council, can go to a full judicial review. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that at the end of the day they will win, but at least they can air their arguments over why they believe it is wrong to put asylum seekers at this Lincolnshire base at a full judicial review. Now, we had a bit of a rolled up here. We had a bit of a rolled up hearing also with regard to Wethersfield Council in Essex, and that was the base, I should say, down in Essex. I'm just hearing that Wethersfield Air Base, the decision there will also go to a judicial review. So let's just repeat that to clarify. That's both West Lindsey District Council up in Lincolnshire and Braintree Council in Essex will be able to go to a full judicial review to argue against the Home Office plans to house asylum seekers at the RAF Scampton base, the former Dam Busters base in Lincolnshire, and former RAF Wethersfield, now an MOD site down in Wethersfield, which is near Braintree. That's Braintree District Council that we're bringing that particular case, as well as a local resident. 3 people altogether bringing claims against the Home Office here, asking for those claims to be explored in a fuller High Court hearing, a judicial review. So Mrs. Justice Thornton, who over a couple of days listened to the arguments from all 3 parties, has decided that yes, indeed, they should go to a judicial review. So another setback of sorts for the government, in the sense that they are going to have to continue to fight this, especially given that we got the news that on Wednesday of this week, the first 46 asylum seekers, all young males, were sent into the Wethersfield base in Essex. So they began already the process of putting people at that former RAF base, even though we are at a point where it has not been fully decided. We've still got to have this judicial review carried out. So one can only imagine it would be deeply embarrassing for the government that if they eventually lost that, they have to start taking people back out of there again. Now, in terms of the judge and what she said, this is Mrs. Justice Thornton. She said the decision to accommodate asylum seekers on the sites may give rise to strong local opinion, adding that there may also be wider discussions about the welfare of the asylum seekers. Those are not, however, matters for the court, she said. She then continued that 2 out of the 15 grounds could go ahead to a further hearing, including on the use of emergency planning powers. Both of these grounds were advanced by all three claimants, the judge continued. So I'll just clarify on the emergency planning powers. The Home Office is effectively adopting an opt-out clause that they have. If they declare a national emergency, and they have done in the sense of the small boats coming across the channel, they have announced it in planning terms. That allows them to bypass local planning laws and put asylum seekers on property that they own, such as a Ministry of Defence site. That's what they have done. Whether that is lawful or not will now be looked at in more detail by this judicial review that both Braintree District Council and also a local resident down in Essex and West Lindsey District Council up in Lincolnshire have been granted permission to seek.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for bringing us that news. We've been waiting for it all morning. We did get there eventually. Judicial reviews are taking place.
Yeah, very significant, actually, and it may be a win for the local councils involved and for campaigners who don't want to see asylum seekers in these bases. But it is a loss for the government, who are scraping around, really, for places to house all these thousands of people coming across the channel.
Indeed. Well, our paper reviewers are still with us, indeed, Christopher Biggins and Annabelle Denham. And actually, this leads us on nicely, Annabelle, to your next story. Another setback for the government.
If you can believe it, Tom, yes. This is the news that Sunak may be forced to postpone the deadline on his 5 pledges, this is according to Tory MPs and insiders. It would be enormously humiliating for Rishi Sunak, who, when he stood up in January and set out his 5 promises for the country, was ridiculed, really, because people felt that they were more forecast than they were pledges, that, you know, he was essentially saying the sun might shine in the summer. And yet here we are with the debt now equivalent to over 100% of GDP, with him really struggling to stop the boats as he promised. The numbers so far this year are around 12,000. That's compared to 45,000 last year. But June was the highest number on record, at nearly 4,000.
We normally see all of these, the bulk of this stuff comes in the late summer,
yes.
So we're yet to see the big surge if it does occur.
That's right. And of course, he was in Dover a few weeks ago saying he really was managing to stop the boats. Well, it was quite obvious that that was just a consequence of bad weather and rough seas. But then NHS backlog, we learnt this week, 7.5 million people. Inflation remaining very sticky, 8.7%. So it may well be that actually it's economic growth, which is the sole pledge he's able to deliver on.
And that's anemic. Christopher, did the Prime Minister hold himself as a hostage to fortune with these pledges?
Oh, I think so.
Everyone, as Annabelle said, everyone was saying, oh, that's so easy. That's a
all he has to do is
forecast.
sit back and inflation will fall by itself, they said.
Oh, dear.
Yes, it was only the Stop the Boats pledge that people were,
questioning, and now
it's every single one of them.
Oh, yeah, I do think that Keir Starmer is the luckiest man in politics. I mean, just everything has gone right for him in the way that everything has gone wrong for this government. But shall we take our news overseas now?
Yes.
To Hollywood.
I know. This is, of course, all to do with all the actors are going on strike. The writers have been on strike, and now the actors have joined forces because they're complaining about the fact, which is very... I sympathise with this, because Netflix has a blockbuster of a series called Orange is the New Black, and certain people are saying that their repeats fees are over a year, were like under $20 or something. Right. Now, interestingly enough, I can understand that. So let me tell you something. I was in a series called Porridge years ago, in '74, and I was on £90 an episode. Now, if that was shown on BBC One or BBC Two, I'd get over £1,000 in repeats. Now, it's shown never on those, very rarely, but on Dave, and I get about £4.36 as a repeat. Now, what they don't, but they do mention this in the paper here, The Guardian, they do mention the fact that their fees are £200,000 per episode. Now, that's quite a lot of money.
See, if I do a bit of work and someone wants to repeat it a few years later, I don't expect more money for that.
Yeah,
Perhaps this is...
You're getting paid a fortune now, though, for this.
Oh, I wish. If only the 35% that the junior doctors was applying to, you know.
You'd never expect Hollywood actors to vote for strike action, would you, Annabelle?
No, and I think perhaps they've lost a sense of perspective, because how many struggling actors and actresses must there be in Hollywood who would absolutely die, would give so much for a part on a show like Orange is the New Black. So no, I struggle to muster up too much.
Is this really actors going on strike, or is this actors who are out of work anyway, just saying, oh no, I'm doing this entirely out of principle? It's not that I can't. It's not that my agents has sort of dried up the offers and, you know, my career's going downhill. It's that I'm on a point of principle not working.
But if you become an actor, you don't do it for the money.
No?
No.
What do you do it for?
You do it for the love, the warmth of the audience, the excitement of the theatre. I mean, it's, you know, you can, of course. People earn millions. Big stars.
But I suppose that's a very small number of all actors.
Tiny number. And, you know, you just have to... I mean, I know so many people who are absolutely brilliant and never, ever succeed. And they're wonderful. It's a horrible profession. If people come to me for advice and say, I'd like to be an actor, I say, don't do it. And then I qualify it by saying, but if you really want to do it, go for it.
Is that just because you don't want the competition?
Oh, no. I love the competition. No, it's a terrible job, though. It really is.
A terrible job. Well, it looks so glamorous. I mean, we've been seeing the Barbie press tour, haven't we, for the new Barbie film?
This is the first summer where I've genuinely been excited about films coming out. Mainly Napoleon. It looks amazing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Also Oppenheimer.
Yes.
Also Wonka, the Willy Wonka film, and Barbie, which looks... actually, I mean, the way it was described to me by someone was, if you really hate Barbie, you will love this film. I mean, it seems like we've sort of returned to an age of Hollywood blockbuster.
You were up for Ken, weren't you?
I wish.
Yeah, we could be the alternative.
I've been auditioning on Instagram.
No, and don't forget the new Mission Impossible film. I'm very excited about that.
Which is, I mean, how many of these Mission Impossible films have we seen? 7 or 8 now?
Yes.
But no,
and this is part 1 as well.
Oh,
so
my goodness me. But like, is there a problem here in Hollywood where the repeats, not the repeats, the sequels always tend to make more money than original ideas? So we get remakes and repeats. I mean, yet another Willy Wonka film. It'll be the 3rd one that's come out. I mean, have we lacked originality? Is this due to the writers' strike?
We absolutely have lost originality. That's the terrible problem. Because no one has it in television now. No one has any imagination. So what do? They look back at huge successes and say, let's do that again, which is rubbish. There are people out there, brilliant writers, coming up with wonderful ideas, but people don't want to take the risk.
Well, they say that there are 7 storylines anyway, don't they?
Yes.
So they've only got that much to play with.
You're right.
Shakespeare did them all, right?
Certainly in the opera.
In the opera?
Yes.
I've only seen 1 opera in my life.
Well, they're always devastatingly sad.
Yeah.
You need to get down to the opera. I'll take you, Tom.
Oh, do you know what? I went to see Madame Butterfly not that long ago, which was fine. But I prefer what's
Barbie,
Miss Saigon?
the movie.
Oh, Miss Saigon.
Yeah, Miss Saigon. That is.
That's a musical. That is.
That's based on.
It's based on Madame Butterfly, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, we're getting down into the depths of opera now. But thank you so much, Christopher Biggins and Annabelle Denham, for taking us through these stories and discussing them with us here. We've just got time for a couple of views now at the end of the programme to finish off on our big pertinent question today. Phones in pubs.
To ban or not to ban?
To ban or not to... That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous...
All right.
Mike has written in to say, it might sound good, but what about pubs with apps to order drinks and food? Increasing number of apps.
Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to face with you today, Tom Harwood.
It's been a treat. But no, Emily Carver, Tom Harwood, signing off from Britain's Newsroom. Up next, it's the Live Desk.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News.